Bags 7, 8, 9, and 10. Straightforward, but not that simple, but also a few tips to help you along the way. Let's just get right into it. Bag number 7, we're talking about the center stiffeners and the center post for the chassis. Car right here. So in this area, you got the center posts and center stiffeners. Basically, the center posts are to help mount the top deck of the chassis, which will be added on later on, and as well as the center stiffeners that are on the bottom of the chassis. There's kind of a way to adjust the vehicle, how it handles to your liking. So I'm not going to go over that in this video, but keep in mind that the center stiffeners at the bottom of the chassis, there are several holes there for either extra screws or less screws to give a better feel for the vehicle depending on the driver. But yeah, that's bag number 7. Really simple, straightforward center posts and the center stiffeners. Bag number 8, I'm talking about the suspension mounts, but also a tip for this step or this bag. You may also want to bring in components from bag number 9 into this step. I'll get more into it a little bit here, but yeah, let's get into the suspension mounts. First, we're talking about the front and rear lower arms. So here are the front ones, lower ones here, down here. As well as the suspension mounts. So there's one main block in the front, a couple of blocks behind, same thing on the rear side. A suspension mount all the way in the rear, and then 2 blocks on the other side of the arms. The suspension mounts, small parts, there's also a bushing that goes inside. Pay attention to the orientation of that bushing. Basically, you're using bushing number 3 for both the front and the rear, but you will notice on the bushing that there's a dot next to the number. So in this case, the dot is in front of the number 3. The dot is actually the orientation of the pinhole. So for the front mounts, you want the dots or the pinholes to be inwards to the chassis. And on the rear, you want the pinholes or the dots towards the outside of the chassis. Also, the bushings don't automatically fit perfectly into the suspension mounts. So what you may want to try is putting those bushings into the aluminum blocks or those aluminum mounts first prior to getting everything screwed onto the chassis. Just makes it a little bit easier and a lot less tedious. So that's basically the suspension mounts. And as I mentioned, you may want to also bring in a component from bag number 9. And that's what I'm talking about here is basically there's an attachment, especially for the rear lower arms, that it's like a small assembly for the it's like an adapter assembly, you can say, that mounts from the lower rear arm to the anti-roll bar, which I'll be talking about in bag number 9. So just a little bit of forewarning, look at the components for bag number 9. You want to probably bring that in first to help you mount that kind of adapter arm, which includes a couple of ball studs, and you want to get that onto the rear lower arms first during this step. It just makes it a little bit easier, and it gets a little tight when you're trying to screw in those ball studs while everything's already attached. So just really quickly. So what I had to deal with was, because the ball stud's already down below and I already had mounted everything, it was a little bit tedious to kind of screw in the ball stud to those to the lower rear arms. So especially on the side where the battery goes, it's gets pretty tight right there. So anyway, just a little tip, or yeah, kind of a trick, I guess. You want to get that mounted on as much as you can, mount it onto that lower rear arm as much as possible. So yeah, we'll go to bag number 9 and I'll talk more about those parts. Bag number 9, also straightforward, not so simple. As I mentioned, you may want to bring in some of the components from bag number 9 into the middle of your build during bag number 8. And I'm talking about this adapter assembly right about here. You can see it mounts to the lower rear arm, and it also mounts to the anti-roll bar. Now, reason being is, one, it gets a little tough to mount this assembly when you already have the suspension arms and all the suspension blocks mounted. So as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to get a screwdriver, your hex driver in there. But thinking ahead also, I would prefer, and you would probably prefer, to pop in the ball studs onto those plastic ends first. It's a lot harder to pop in those ball studs when everything's put together. So really quickly, you'll see how I pop in the ball studs into those plastic ends. Just before you pop them in, mind the orientation. Just understand the orientation it needs to be in, especially after it's all assembled. So get those ball studs in, and then work your way back to creating the assembly and then mounting the anti-roll bar onto the front and rear bulkheads. So it seems simple, but as I mentioned, a little bit of growing pains. I put together one of the assemblies first, and it was harder to pop those ball studs in. So on future parts that need ball studs, just remember, pop the ball studs in and then go from there. So yeah, I know it's kind of a long-winded there, but it's one of those steps that will definitely help you along the way when building your vehicle. So yeah, bag number 9 should have been a little bit of parts in bag number 8, but yeah, I got through it. So all right, on to the next bag. Bag number 10, the last bag for this video. This one, again, straightforward, but the reason why it was not so simple is a couple things. One, very small and tiny shims that you need to pay attention to. Wasn't as easy to get those shims onto the pins and getting everything mounted together. But the second one is, I didn't understand, or I actually also forgot that for some of these parts, you are going to be threading the ball studs or another screw into the part. So what I mean by threading is the parts such as, let me get this right here. Okay, a couple of parts like the rear hub carriers and the steering block, and also the steering hub carriers. Sorry, I just had to get those names out there. So the ball studs actually will be threaded into those parts. Those parts, initially, it's just a blank, you can say, hole. You are actually, as you're screwing the ball stud or another set screw in there, you're actually creating the threads as you're putting the screw or the stud into the part. So as a tip, you may want to, one, know which ball stud or which set screw is going to go onto the part. And I suggest to slowly pre-thread the part. Reason being is, when I didn't do that, it was harder to get the screw into the part in a nice, you can say, perpendicular into the cylinder or the hole. And yeah, you don't want the ball stud or the screw to go in at a basically a severe angle. You want it to go nicely through the part and no issues. So that's just another tip. Pre-thread those hub carriers and the steering blocks prior to completing the full assembly. It'll definitely make it easier. Also, for this step, you also have your turnbuckles. And as I mentioned in step 9 or bag 9, you want to pop in all those ball studs into the ends of the turnbuckles as much as possible. So for this one, you have, let's see, 1, 2, so for bag number 10, you have 8 turnbuckle ends. Pop all those in as much as possible. And again, prior to you doing the full assembly, definitely makes it easier, and you won't be struggling trying to, getting either a pair of pliers to pop in the ball studs afterwards. And you just don't want to damage your any of the parts during the build. So so the two main tips for this one: pre-thread all the parts as much as possible, know which ball stud or screw goes into that particular hole, and then also pop in all the ball studs for all your turnbuckles. So yeah, that's bag number 10. Really simple. No, not simple, straightforward, but not as simple because, again, I had to go through some growing pains in this part of the build. So yeah, so this is how it looks like right now. And yeah, excited because the next few bags, and I'm getting close to the end here, going to be adding electronics such as the servo, battery, and then at some point the speed control, and then the motor, and hopefully soon after that, tires and a body. So I'm sure I'm missing some parts here, but just getting closer to the end of this build. All right. Before I end this, just a couple more tips to help you with your build. A couple of tips for the build. I'm going to talk about one, the turnbuckles, and how I decided to, let's say, orientate the turnbuckles to make it easier for adjustments and I don't have to look at it. And the second one is I'm talking about a tool that will help you in future builds, and unfortunately it's not really talked about in the assembly manual. So it's an extra tool, and I'll talk about that later. So first, let me talk about the turnbuckle. One, when you look at the aluminum turnbuckle itself, you'll notice that on the block, on one side of that block is a notch. That notch indicates that that side of the turnbuckle, that thread, is a left-hand thread. And on the other side, it's a right-hand thread. So to keep it simple, when you're turning the turnbuckle one way, you're going to be spreading the distance of the turnbuckle ends. And when you turn it the other way, you're going to shorten that distance. So we'll talk about the adjustments later down the line. It's more about tuning the vehicle, but just note that when you turn the turnbuckle one way, you're going to be spreading that distance of the ball stud, or if you turn it, when you turn it the other way, you're going to be decreasing that distance. But for this build, just again, keep it simple. What I've done is I've placed the ball studs and the turnbuckles in a way that if I want to shorten the distance, I know I'm going to take my tool and I'm going to be turning it in towards the center of the car. So it's consistent on both ends. So if I want to shorten this distance, I'm going to turn my tool towards the center. Same thing on this side. If I want to shorten this distance, I'm going to turn my tool towards the center. If I want to make it wider, I'm going to turn towards the outside of the vehicle. And then if I want to extend this distance here, I'm going to turn my tool again towards the outside of the vehicle. So that's just a preference I'm doing for this build. If you have another preference, shoot, just go for it. But again, I just want to keep it consistent. That way I'm not looking at the threads while I'm on the track. I know how I'm going to adjust right away. Okay, so that's on the turnbuckles. The other tip I have is, and you may want to get one, is you want to get probably a either cheap set. You can get like a $20 set of calipers, digital calipers, at your local hardware store. But for this one, there is a step where you have to measure the distance of the set screw to the end of the arm. And instead of just using the tips here, as you can see, instead of just using these to measure out your distance, and you'll see once everything's put together, it's kind of hard to get in there. Hopefully I can kind of show you, but again, it's going to be hard to get in there. Just a quick tip, there's two other ways to measure that distance. One is, I'm not going to show the details of this one, but one is you can actually use a flat edge here. Let me try to get this in focus here. There's a flat edge here and then a flat edge of the moving piece. So you can see right there. So that's one way to also measure that distance. And the other way is actually, if you look at the back end right here, I'm going to flip this way. As I move this, you can see back here, you also have a way to measure. So this is how I measured the distance of the set screws to the A arms, or sorry, not A arms, but the lower suspension arms. So just a quick tip on using a set of calipers. If you're not aware of it, yeah, there's actually 4 ways to measure your distance. One is obviously you have your main tips here. You have the second one, the top tips. You also have the flat edges back here. And then you also have, get this oriented, you have this as well. So yeah, if you didn't know that, well, now you know. So, but a good set of calipers will help you along with the build, especially when you've got some parts here, such as these set screws. You want to get it into the right dimensions. And as well as when you're working with the turnbuckles, there is an initial distance you want to work with. And later on the line, I know I'm going to use it for kind of taking notes on my adjustments for my setup. So yeah, that was basically it. Turnbuckles, mind the orientation, know how you want to set it up, be consistent about it. And also second, set of digital calipers or even manual dial calipers will help you along the way for your build. So, all right, that's basically it. This is a quick update, not really quick. I know it's a long video, but thank you for watching. Yeah, if you like the content, hit the like button. Want to see more? The subscribe button. I always get that wrong. Subscribe button. And then, yeah, if you really want to go crazy and yeah, just know every time I do put up a video, yeah, there's also the notification bell. So thank you for watching. Do appreciate it. And yeah, more updates coming up. Excited. Talk to you later.